Hi, good morning, and welcome back to the Kristin Omdahl Show. This is episode 1133, and we are live in Southwest Florida in my studio. It's also Tuesday, Giving Tuesday, and the day we dedicate my live show to talking about Shawls for Sharing, my charity where I bring awareness and support survivors of domestic violence. And in this quarter, we're going to be dedicating the shawl pattern, Tranquil Tiles shawl pattern, to Shawls for Sharing, which means 100% of the proceeds of this pattern, whoops, piece of yarn flying, will be donated during the quarter. This is the Tranquil Tiles shawl itself, and if you were able to join me about a half an hour ago, we did the second video tutorial for this shawl. First video tutorial live premiered last week, but is available all the time now, and that was where I showed you how to crochet the triangles along the top edge. And then today, in the second tutorial video, I showed you how to create the square motif and also how to join it on a two-sided join to make this a join as you go fabric. Super fun, super cool, not as hard as it sounds. And if you follow along with me, the video supplements the written instructions in the pattern as well as the chart, so there's lots of ways to get all of that good information and different ways to learn it all at the same time. So hopefully that helps you. This happens to be a one ball project because I used Hobie Yarn's Mega Ball Aran yarn, which is a whopping 765 yards of number 4 weight yarn, which means I was able to do this entire shawl with only one ball of yarn. Isn't that amazing? Did have to cut the tail, have a lot of tails though, 2 tails per square and per motif, but that's okay. Also, what else? In previous weeks of the show, we've talked about different ways to change up the shawl. We've talked about, let's see, if you want to go back and look, there's a playlist for the Shawls for Sharing episodes of the Kristin Omdahl Show. And if you go in there for this quarter, you'll see each week I've dedicated the show to different ways to manipulate the stitch pattern. I like focusing on the tutorials in actual tutorial videos and then having a conversation here where we talk about different ways to use the pattern or ways to deconstruct the pattern and extract different bits to use for other things. And we've gone over some color work. Here's an example of changing color to show the texture of the motifs in a different way. Notice how you can see the squares a lot more prominently here than you see them here. In the solid color, you see a beautiful lace fabric and maybe not so much see the pattern as much with a lighter background. Let's put it over. You can see it a little better over this background. But still, it's more of an all-over lace effect, whereas when you change color, whether it's here or in the video today where I changed color, solid color in each square, that also shows the squares and shows the construction more as well. I forgot to say hi to everybody today. Thanks for sharing the links, Judy. I guess we all said hi in the last video too, although I'm not sure everybody that was there is here. Hi Judy, Tammy, Sharon, Chris, Joe, Donna, Joan. All right, I think I'm caught up. Not bad. Yeah, there's some questions about what I'm wearing today too. I am wearing the Sarisa poncho or swancho. Some people like to call it a poncho. Some people like to call it a swancho because it has sleeves and the sides are together. It can be worn as a sweater, but so that's why some people call it a swancho. It's part shawl, part sweater, part poncho. Super cozy and warm, and it is freezing here right now. Maybe not freezing compared to where you live, but freezing to me being in Southwest Florida. And we are not going to have our special guest star Bjorn this morning. He is he's being Nurse Bjorn for Grandma. He's he's staying with Grandma right now. I have been too. My mom had a little accident this week and we're hanging out with her, making sure she's okay, and also it's been really cold and I've been too chicken to turn the propane tank back on since the gas scares and stuff. So whatever, I know, you can call me a chicken if you want. It is what it is. You know, sometimes I can only take so much and some things are just, not ready to do it yet. So anyway, with a cold snap, we headed over to Grandma's house, who doesn't live very far away, and she's been, Bjorn has been such a delight for her. He's been such a good little cuddler, and little Bjorn, nurse Bjorn, he's been putting a smile on her face, so it's all good. So that's why he's not here with me today. And it's freezing in here, so I'm wearing a poncho. Oh, sometimes it's called an east-west top. That's cool too. Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, she's going to be better. Yep. Yes, Christine, this poncho is something a beginner could make. Absolutely. The pattern's available on my website. There's I believe there's a supplemental video tutorial for it. The stitch pattern is pretty easy to, yeah, there is a video for it. I remember doing it now. The pattern is quite easy to do. You just need, it's a 2-row repeat. You just have to learn how to do that. And then it's just 2 rectangles to make and join together. It's very easy. And like I said, there's charts, written instructions, and supplemental video tutorials, so absolutely you could make it. Let's see. Hi, Irene. Yeah, my mom doesn't have Wi-Fi or internet at her house, so it's making a lot of things more challenging for me to run back and forth between the 2 places. But I thought you all would love to hear and would be so proud of Bjorn to hear what a good helper he's being this week. He's being quite an angel at Grandma's house and just bringing such a smile and joy to her days that, yeah. I'm very proud of Bjorn this week. All right, we've chatted. I've chatted too long about that. Let's get down to the good stuff. And what I wanted to do today, let's see, where is this going to be easier to write or to draw? I'm going to move the shawls now so that we can get down to drawing, because I wanted, actually I wanted to mention one more thing. Okay, if you're going to do color work in this shawl, if you don't change the direction of the colors like I did here, you will end up using way more yardage of one color than the other. Let's say you did all the squares in this color formation where you went from dark to light. Wherever that darkest center is, that uses the least amount of yarn, and this final round out here uses the most amount of yarn, right? Does that make sense to everybody? I want to stop here for a second and make sure that that makes sense. The rounds in the middle use the least amount of yarn, least amount of stitches, least amount of yarn, right? And the bigger rounds out here, the most stitches, the most yardage. I want to hold on for a second and pause and make sure everybody understands that real quick, because I'm going to give you a good hack for how to even things out. Yes, Christine, if you're going to do color work, if you're going to do everything all in the same direction and you're doing increases, whether it's a top-down increasing shawl and stripes or motifs, you are definitely going to use a different amount of yarn, and that makes it much harder to figure out how much yarn to buy as well. So if you change direction every other motif, you end up evening it out, right? So on this motif, I used the least amount here, but then I used the most amount of it in this one. And then in the reverse, I used the least amount of the lightest color here and the most amount of the lightest color here. So by the beginning and the end, right? So it's 5 colors. So let's call the darker color color 1. Color 1 averages out to be most and least here. Color 5 averages out to be from most to least. It averages out that way, so that the middle round ends up being very similar to the other colors because we average out least to most. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, round 2, round 4, right? Round 4, round 2, round 1, round 5, round 5, round 1. I know that sounds a little confusing, but it averages out that way. And so what ends up happening is you come much closer to using the same amount of yarn that way. It also looks really cool, right? But if you're, and so then the other flip side of that, let's say you're like, nope, I don't want to do it that way. I want all of the colors to go in the same direction. Fine. You're going to have to do something that you may not want to do though. Pull out your postage scale, and if you don't have a postage scale, you're going to want to go buy one. You can get them at Walmart, you can get them at Staples, you can get them on Amazon, you can buy them in lots and lots of places. But a postage scale, not the scale that you weigh yourself on, it's not detailed enough. You're going to need a postage scale, and you should put it on grams, not ounces, because the smaller the measurement, the more accurate your measurement can be. And what you want to do then is make one motif, then unravel the whole thing, and all those little balls. So like you'll have the tiniest ball of color A little bit bigger of color B, a little bit bigger of color C, a little bit bigger of color D, and a little bit bigger of color E. And then you'll want to weigh all of those. And from there you can figure out the yardage, or just go by the weight. Let's say it's 10 grams, 20 grams, 30 grams, 40 grams, 50 grams, just for even numbers. Well, a lot of small balls of yarn are 50 grams, so it would be a whole ball for that round, whereas it would be a fifth of a ball for this first round. Does that make sense? I'm going to pause and make sure that everybody understands. Christine, that makes me so happy. If this is something you would have never thought of, even though color work is something you would definitely want to do as a beginner, I'm so glad that you came to the show this morning and got to hear this, because yes, knowing this type of information is the difference between having a good experience and a not so good experience when making something, right? The more prepared you are and the more you understand about how much yarn to buy for something, the happier your experience is going to be, for sure. Can you weigh as you work when you cut your strands? Tammy wants to know. What you can do is weigh the remainder of the ball. Like let's say, let's see if I can find a partial ball here. Let's see. Well, I've got these full balls here. That's not going to help. Let's see if I can find a partial ball to help you understand this. Here's a partial ball. Ah, this one's from one of my mystery projects that I can't tell you about yet for the No Shades of Gray Challenge. If you haven't watched yesterday's video, there's a link to my blog where you can find out about my No Shades of Gray Challenge with Hobie Yarns, and leave a comment on my blog and guess what I'm making with those yarns. This is one of the color packs that they sent me. The other two I've made things in already, so I can't show you yet. So what you can do is, let's say you've done the first round, a round of each of your 5 rounds in your 5 colors, and however much your ball weighed to begin with, and the label will tell you, it'll say right on the label, these are 50-gram balls. So as I weigh these balls, each partial ball, I will find out the measurement. Let's say this has 10 grams left. Well, it started as 50. If there's 10 grams left, then I used 40 grams of yarn for that round. I'm going to pause now and make sure that you understand that. As long as you know what the ball weighed to begin with. Now, if you're using scrap yarn and stash yarn, this is much harder to figure out in this direction. Then you would have to unravel and measure instead. But you never have to measure your lengths. If you have the information on your ball band, you can do this with math instead. You don't actually have to measure the strands. You can weigh them, and based on the weight of the ball and the yardage per, like 50 grams, 100 yards, whatever, you can do this. Bye, Joe. Have a good trip. Yeah, so if you don't want to rip out, you could weigh your balls and figure out what's missing. So if this started at 50 grams and whatever it is now, you would subtract that, and the difference would be how much yarn you used here. And that's how I do it. I don't unravel, because I don't usually use stash yarn like little remnant balls. I usually start with fresh balls on a fresh project, because I'm a designer and because I need to know that yardage. It's really important to me to figure things out that way. But either way will work. And this isn't even what I wanted to talk about today, but this is a really important subject when doing color work, so I'm glad somebody brought it up. So we'll move that off to the side. Are we good on this subject? Can we move on? A couple questions came up in the live this morning. Oh, I have another thing to share. Baby Bjorn's been slightly naughty, but in such an adorable way that it doesn't matter. So one of the things that he likes, you know how kitties like to rub their faces on things? He loves to rub his face on my YouTube award to such an extent that he's knocked it off the wall. And I can't find the things that I was hanging it on the wall with. I had it with pins, not nails, and it's fallen under the seat and I can't find it. So I got to figure out another solution because the way I've been hanging it isn't secure enough for baby Bjorn to rub his face on it. Oh, the problems, the first world problems of being a kitty mama, right? Anyway, I don't know, I get a kick out of that. It's so funny. He's so entertaining. What would I do without him? Okay, so I wanted to talk about a couple of different ways that you could make variations in this pattern. So let's draw the shawl real quick. I'm going to draw a smaller version of the shawl. So remember, the Tranquil tile shawl starts with triangles at the top. Can everybody see that? Is it showing up well enough? Yeah, it's a little light, but it's there. Okay, so, and then we join squares with a two-sided join underneath, and that creates a triangle shape with smooth edges, right? We've got our squares on the diamond formation and we've done triangles at the top to smooth out that edge. Now let's say you wanted to do this shawl where you put the squares in the other direction. So you do one row of squares along the top like that, right? Let's do one more square, make it 5. Okay, and then the next row would be still trying to do a triangle shape. Oh, that one's really bad. Let me draw it again. It's kind of hard to draw sideways. Okay, so I'm going to draw it and then turn it around. Okay, so your first row would be 5. See how this is diamond formation squares and this is doing the squares straight on. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that makes sense first. Let's pause for just 1 second and make sure that makes sense. Okay, I got a yes, great. And so we'll just continue doing one less square on each side, and we're getting a fairly triangular shape here, but we've got that rough edge from the squares. Well, instead we did the triangles across the top on this one to smooth it out. On this one, we would do the triangles on the sides. Okay, and then your final triangle down here. And now we've got it. Oh, we would do 2 more right here. You could do your triangles that way, and then you would still get a triangular shape, but you would get a different formation of the squares and put your triangles in different places to still get that smooth edges. Does that make sense? So already we've got 2 different shawls there then. And they would look different because when the squares are in the different formations, it does provide a different fabric for sure. Okay, good, that makes sense, great. Okay, so now you could make any fabric with this too, right? So forget the triangles. We could just do any square or rectangular fabric by joining those squares together. Let me show you this. Okay, so that could be more columns this way of motifs. It could be more rows of motifs this way. So that 2-dimensional fabric could be anything, right? You could do it 10 motifs wide, 10 motifs long. You could make it anything from a baby blanket to a king-size Afghan. You could do it in, you could do more columns than rows or more rows than columns to not be a square but be a rectangle. And you could make a rectangular shawl that way. Or you could make the components to a garment. So let me show you some ideas that I have for turning that into a garment as well. So whether you wanted to do a poncho, I mean, honestly, this could be a poncho. You make 2 fabrics like that, sew along this edge and this edge, leave this open, and maybe even put a turtleneck like on this one. All of a sudden you've got a poncho now, right? Can you see that okay? I think it's showing up pretty well. But what if you want to make a ruana or a vest? Okay, let me draw that real quick. So let's draw the actual schematic of it, and then we can just fill it in the squares, right? So a ruana is 3 rectangles. It's 2 skinny rectangles in the front and 1 thicker rectangle in the back. So we could do that. Oh, I'm drawing terribly this morning. It's the angle. I don't know why this is. The drift now, right? There's variations on how to do it, but ultimately it's the same construction style. So just for rough numbers here, I did 2 motifs wide, 4 motifs long for each of the fronts, and then for the back, it would be 5 motifs wide and 4 long. When I do a ruana, I like to make some space in the middle for where your neck goes. You could do this with just the same size fronts. When combined, they're the same width as the back, so you can't hear me. Is anybody else? Is it me or is it, I don't know. I can pause and see. I don't know. Is anybody else having trouble? Okay, you can. All right. Don't know what that's all about. Does this make, oh good, Judy can hear me. Does everybody understand this now? And then again, if you want to do different colors, you could, I'm going to color in every other motif here so you can see what that would look like. Maybe you can see the back better that way too. Okay, so then that would be this one, that one. But now we've come to another design issue here that would bother some people and not bother other people. Now our fronts aren't symmetrical, okay? So depending on whether or not you want that center panel down the back to make room for the neck and make the back wider than the combination of the 2 fronts, if you're doing that in motifs, if you were changing color on it like this, you would now have mirrored fronts, not identical fronts. But again, that's where the design choices come in. That may, if that bothers you, maybe you wouldn't want to do that in multiple colors. Maybe you would want to do it all in one color. Then this conversation doesn't matter at all. Okay, so now I can show you, let's talk about making this a garment, like a pullover. And if anybody else has any other suggestions on any other schematics you'd like me to draw for taking these motifs and turning it into something else, let me know. I agree, Judy, I do like it mirrored as well. Some people might be tweaked by it mirrored and other people would be tweaked by it being identical, right? People definitely, everybody has a different opinion on the aesthetic of it, and either way, you would have to decide what's important to you in that. But if there's another garment you want me to demonstrate here, let me know. In the meantime, I'm going to show you how to do a pullover and maybe a cardigan with sleeves. Okay, so let's do a shell first. So you could very easily do a shell, meaning just a tank top, right? Just a tank top, no sleeves, no bells and whistles. I didn't do straight lines again. I don't know why, but I'm having a hard time drawing sideways again. Okay, so let's do it in 2 ways. First, we'll just do the plain regular square formation. Again, don't worry about my lines. That doesn't matter. I think you can get the gist of it. So you could sew the shoulders here. Leave this open for the head. You could sew down here or do corset ties. You don't actually have to sew if you don't want to. Leave this open for your arms, and now you've got a tank top. But what if you would want to do this in the diamond formation? Then what are we doing? Well, we're going to do something different then. So let's draw that rectangle again. But now, in order to keep those smooth lines, we'll have to put triangles around the edge and do the diamonds in the middle. Let's see if I can draw this right first time out. Oh yeah, I think we're going to get it. Okay, so now we've drawn that in the diamond formation. So I'm going to color in the triangles so you can see where they're at, and you can see where the squares are in the middle. So see how you would have to do triangles on the edges? Remember the shawl, we did triangles across the top to keep it smooth. So that's less complicated than this. This gets a little more complicated, but it follows the lines of what you've already learned by doing the shawl, so that's okay. Sometimes when you learn things, they're not linear, they're compound. So meaning that when you learn something, you can then apply it to something that's a little more advanced. Once you get one thing down, you can apply it to something else a little more advanced, and it's not as overwhelming as if you started there because you're building on your. So can you see now where you would make the squares lines with the triangles and get that diamond formation, and then you would still sew your shoulder seams, leave an opening for your head, sew your side seams, or corset tie them and leave an opening for your arms. Maybe you would want to add some shaping to this garment without actually adding shaping, because shaping makes this more complicated still. So if you're going to do that, don't sew at the very bottom. Leave the last 6 to 8 inches open, and then you've got side vents. I love side vents, and side vents are a great way to add a figure flattering shape to something without having to add the complication of shaping within a pattern. It makes it easier that way. Does that make sense? I'll pause for a minute here to make sure that makes sense, because then we'll move on and talk about V-neck shaping and or sleeve addition. Because if you wanted to do a V-neck like on a cardigan, you go back to adding triangles again. And we've done this before. We did this on the Audra poncho. The Audra poncho has a V-neck, and that's because I did partial motifs here, and that was a circular motif pattern. So we did half circles to replicate. So a half circle is a half motif, just like a triangle is a half square motif. So a half circle is half a motif of a circle motif, and a triangle motif is a half of a square motif, right? Does that make sense? So if you use a half, you can do some shaping. So let's go back to, well, let's draw, no, we'll not draw the Audra poncho. That's going to add too much variation here. Let's just do a pullover, and then I'll switch and do a cardigan too. So let's do a pullover, kind of like these. Okay. And let's say, I'm going to make this one 4-1. And depending on what you're doing, having an odd number of motifs or an even number of motifs makes a difference. So like on this one here, this is an odd number to cross. Depending on where you wanted to put your V-neck, it could get funky here. And that's why sometimes the bigger motifs are really difficult to make sized garments, because a lot of times you want to just add one more column of motifs. But if you're doing something based on odd or even, then it changes that. And if the motif is large, so like the motifs in the shawl are 10-inch motifs, that means you're going to change your sizing by 20 inches. It's not applicable. Like sometimes it doesn't make sense. Anyway, so let's change this. We're going to make this an even number of motifs so I can show you where you would put your shaping to do a V-neck. V-necks are very flattering in cardigans. They can be flattering in pullovers as well. So here, where I would do that is right here. Okay, so then we would, instead of these two being squares, we're just going to show the front of it, because the back of it, more than likely, you wouldn't put V-neck shaping on the back too. More than likely you would make the back just straight across. So let's just do a dotted line across there now. So your back, so you're doing a front and back if you're making a garment, right? So on the front you would add triangles at the top center to create your V-neck, but you would still do squares on the back to keep a straight edge along the back. Okay, and you'd still sew your shoulders, sew your shoulder seams. Try saying that. That's a tongue twister. And then you would either sew down here up into the armhole opening, or corset tie them, whatever you want to do. You know I love corset ties too. Gives you so much more flexibility, and it's easier for some people, and it has a nice I don't know, boho quality that we all like to. So does this make sense? And again, this is still using the same motif that we talked about over here. And let's say you're trying to get it to a size. Well, don't do it in worsted weight yarn with a K hook. Do this same motif in a sport weight yarn and a G hook or a 4mm hook. Make smaller motifs so that you can adjust your sizing better. If this was 10-inch motifs, we're looking at 40 inches wide here. If these were 4-inch motifs, we're looking at 16 inches wide here. If these were 5-inch motifs, we're looking at 20 inches wide here. See the difference? It makes a huge difference when you're designing something to fit, whereas if you're designing an Afghan or something that doesn't need to fit, totally different story. So you can apply this to, and again, if you're doing these in even smaller motifs, okay, each of these squares could be represented by 4 squares as well. This could be this could be 16 motifs wide if you're doing really tiny squares. All of this applies to any size of motifs. If you're doing smaller motifs, you need more, and if you're doing bigger motifs, you need less. That's all. Okay, so where would we add sleeves here? We could add motifs. Now, if you're going to do shaping in your sleeves, this is where there's another trick that I think might be easier for that, and that is adjusting the size of your motifs. So let's say you're using a K hook or a 6.5mm hook to make your motifs. I would use the same size hook for your motifs on your sleeve as you did in the body. But then if you wanted this to taper like that, if you wanted your sleeves to get narrower as you made your way down to the cuff, you could, every row of motifs, you could use a smaller hook. And this depends on the type of yarn you use. Not all yarns can be adjusted that well. Thinner yarns are really good for this. Thicker yarns are a little harder for doing this, because what happens is you go tighter and it gets stiffer, but in the thinner yarns you have a lot more leeway in adjusting your gauge to create shaping as well. So does that make sense? So if you wanted a straight sleeve, oh, here's another thing. If you didn't want to do that, but you still wanted some shaping, you could make your sleeves full width and then add a tighter cuff so that they would still cinch in at the bottom too. So there's lots of ways to get the illusion of shaping without having to do the complicated part of actually adjusting within stitch patterns and stuff. And that applies to not only motifs, but any stitch pattern as well. Yay, I'm seeing so many yeses. So yeah, you could either be happy with a straight sleeve, you could either taper your sleeve by adjusting your gauge with changing your hook size. This applies to knitting as well. Or you could add a tighter cuff to cinch it all in too, like we did here. We've got a cuff there. Does that make sense? And so all of this is stuff you can do with the Tranquil Tiles crochet shawl pattern, because you've already been given the instructions, the videos, and the charts to make a triangle motif. Whoops, what did I do here? You already know how to make, and we've done the videos now too, and you've got the pattern. You know how to make a square motif. Let's see, we'll draw one. You know how to make a square motif, and you know how to make a triangle motif. And once you know how to make a square motif and a triangle motif in the same stitch pattern, you can make a couple variations of a triangular shawl. You can make a simple pullover or poncho. You can make a ruana. You can do a rectangular fabric in diamond formation to make a garment. This would also be pretty as an Afghan as well. You could make any of these into Afghans or rectangular shawls, and then you can make garments not only with squared off edges but also with a v-neck, and you could even do tapered sleeves if you so desired. So lots and lots of options. And then one more, I know we've gone over a little bit, but there was a question in the live stream, in the live premiere of the video premiere this morning, and someone talked about making a trapezoid in the original formation of the shawl here. So let's draw that as well. And basically what she was saying is, could she make the triangle but end early, and what would she do to shape? So she was talking about making a shape like this. Okay, and that shape we've done this shape many times before when we've done a half hexagon shawl where we did top down increases, right? Which is just basically a top down triangular shawl but with 3 sections instead of 2, right? Top down triangular increasing shawl is 2 sections and half hexagon is 3. But she was asking, yes, cutting this out in paper would be very helpful. You could take some grid paper to make sure you get your sizes right, maybe make sure that they're all nine squares each, but that would be very helpful in configuring a design, absolutely. Okay, so how would we do this with these motifs? Let's see, where are we going to find space? You know what, I'm going to erase this one and do it right next to the other shawl. I like this tabletop dry erase board. Okay, so we'd start the top the same way as we started the other one. This would be the same as the original shawl, the Tranquil tile shawl. And then we would make our squares until we got to the length that we wanted, right? And then you could draw a triangle across the bottom to square it off. Let's make this a little bit wider. There we go. And now we've got that half hexagon shape by doing triangles across the top, squares in the middle on the diamond formation, and then evening up that lower edge with the triangle motif. So the triangle motifs mirror the top and the bottom to smooth out those lines. Same way we would do if we were doing an Afghan in that formation or any other squared off fabric. Remember, that's where I colored in the triangles so you could see them separate from the squares. Wow, that's great. You know what, Christine? I was worried that it was going to sound more complicated by breaking it down like this, but at the same time, I think it's so important to understand that when you have, and this applies to any motif, if you have the square and triangle version of any motif, you can do this with any motif. This is not just about the Tranquil tiles. This is about motif construction. Motif construction is amazing. And I think it's actually easier to design shapes this way than in a stitch pattern with increases, especially figuring out the increase for a stitch pattern. So when you do break it down, it opens up a whole new world of being able to design and explore on your own. But I was worried that it was going to sound too much, so I'm thrilled that that worked out for you. And does everybody else understand? Does this help? Is this helpful? Is it too much? Let me know. And if you haven't checked out my blog post about the No Shades of Gray challenge with Hobie Yarn, please head over to my blog today and you can leave a comment there and I will, let me see if I can find it real quick because I would love to hear from you. A bunch of people have left their comments now and what they'd like to see me make in the yarns, and you can see the colors up close too. Here we go. I'd love to see your comments there. And it'll be interesting to see if anybody guesses correctly on what I'm making. And all I can tell you is you're going to love what I'm making. How's that for a nice little tease? Yay! More people saying it made sense and it was helpful. I'm so, so, so glad. Because motifs are super duper fun, and once you get over maybe the intimidation of joining as you go, or figuring out however you want to join them, it doesn't matter. Do you? You know, if you like join as you go, great. If you like sewing them, that's great. If you like slip stitching to join, that's great. There's no wrong way to be creative if you're getting the results you want. Always remember that. It's about exploring. It's about exploring your creative spirit and having fun. That's it. That's it. So however you get the results that you want, it's okay. And I'm very happy to share with you all sorts of options because you get to then decide which options work best for you. And it may not be all the same time. Having these skills in your toolbox mean you get to choose on any given project which tool you want to use. It's up to you. And that's awesome. Oh, thanks, Judy. Yeah, if you enjoyed the show, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe so we can hang out more often, and you'll get notified when I go live or when I have a new video to share or when I share posts. Sometimes I share posts on my community tab as well, where I share what I'm doing somewhere else. So all that's good. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to spend a few minutes with me. Thank you for your well wishes for my mom. Thank you for sharing my pride and joy with how sweet baby Bjorn is being and taking care of his grandma this week. Yes, if you would like to support me on Patreon, I would enjoy it very much. And there's so many cool benefits that you get there. And I have to say, I'm going to be sharing an announcement on Patreon next week on the live stream for Tier 2 that I am not sharing anywhere else on social media. It's something that's a little bit private to me and a little bit special to me. And I decided that, I went through so much weird hater crap on social media last year that I don't want to share something special that's going on in my life right now, truly publicly. But I know so many of you would love to hear what's bringing joy to my heart right now. So I'll be sharing some tidbits of truly behind the scenes stuff next week. And I'll probably be sharing some sneak peeks of the new No Shades for Gray stuff that I'm not sharing publicly yet too. But something really special in my heart I'll be sharing next week in that behind the scenes. Remember, that's where I sometimes show up in my pajamas and sometimes just make it like we're just hanging out. It's nice to do something like that. When you're in the public eye like this all the time, it's fun to do things a little differently and a little more casual sometimes. So yes, if you're a Patreon subscriber and you're level 2 or higher, you will be invited to that live stream, or if you already are, you've already been invited to it. It'll be next Wednesday at 10 a.m. What else? Right, Angela, that's what I'm trying to do. And it's really difficult to figure that out when you are in the public eye, because in some channels, in some places, your friends and your haters are mixed together. And Patreon is one place where I know that it's a little more friendly towards me there, if that makes sense. Anyway, I think we've covered a bunch of stuff today. I don't know if we went over everything. If you decide that you have questions about anything I talked about today, always feel welcome to come back to the comments and ask. I get notified of the comments as well. And if you check the videos anywhere else, you know that I reply to everybody's comments anyway. Maybe not the crappy ones, but all the good ones I do. Sometimes I ignore the mean ones. What are you going to do? Anyway, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to spend a few minutes here with me. I hope you enjoyed our in-depth conversation about motifs and everything else we talked about. I hope you enjoyed chatting with me and everyone else. Let us make time to create, share, and inspire today and every day. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Oh, let's see if I can reach it.